And on behalf of Hunter College President Nancy Cantor, I want to welcome our audience, our co-sponsors at the League of Conservation Voters, and our leading candidates for Congress from the 12th CD in Manhattan, which of course includes the Hunter campus. We've been lucky in this district, whichever number it's been assigned over the years, over the generations. Carolyn Maloney, who was elected 15 times on the eastern side of the current district, not only did tremendous work in Congress, she is now in her third term as our own Eleanor Roosevelt Distinguished Leader in Residence here at Roosevelt House. And she's watching on Zoom tonight, so we greet her and thank her for her service. And Congressman Jerry Nadler, who alleges that he's watching on Zoom from Washington. I've known him, I hate to admit it, for about, I think, 57 years. He's been a voice for justice and progressive values for decades. Both, of course, have been environmental champions as well. Going back even further, it was Bella Abzug, my old boss, with whom I began my service on this very day in 1975 at St. Patrick's Day, on St. Patrick's Day, who created the means of trading in federal superhighway funding for mass transit, a model environmental rescue half a century ago. So I hope all of you, by the way, get a chance to visit our exhibit upstairs when we have our reception, because it's dedicated to great Hunter alumni, including Bella. And I must add, since we are in Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt's home, the very house he left 93 years ago this month for his inauguration as president, that FDR's own passion for conservation and environmental protection is a too often overlooked hallmark of the New Deal, which was conceived right upstairs in the little library that served for 4 months as his transition headquarters. So right in this building, plans were hatched that led to the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was Roosevelt's tree army, planting millions of trees, created bike lanes, trails, wildlife shelters. He created national parks. He signed soil conservation measures to protect the Dust Bowl, protected the Everglades, and built sustainable power projects around the country. So we have an environmental and a history of our own right here at Roosevelt House. Since it's Women's History Month, let me close with these words from Eleanor, a true champion of the planet in her own right. This is Eleanor speaking. In many areas of the world, very little has been done to bring the people to an understanding of how important it is to preserve wildlife, to guard the soil of a nation, as well as its waters and forests. This requires legislation and very often education to appreciate the natural environment so we will not endanger it by our actions. As usual, Eleanor had it right and ahead of her time. With that, it's a pleasure to welcome our co-host, the president of the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund, Julie Tai.
Thank you so much, Harold, and so nice to be here in a place that's rich with history. I'm actually an assemblyman, bought me the book that talks about Roosevelt's history as a conservationist, since it was such an important part of his administration and his legacy. Happy St. Patrick's Day. It's a wonderful day to be green. As a person of Irish heritage and a person who works in the environment, I wear green quite a bit. So thank you all for joining me in that. Thank you for joining us for our Environmental Candidate Forum for the New York Congressional District 12, which I am a constituent. My name is Julie Tai, as was mentioned, and I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. We are a statewide environmental advocacy organization whose mission is to educate, engage, and empower New Yorkers to be effective advocates for the environment. We ensure that the environment and climate change are front and center on the campaign trail and that voters know where candidates stand on these issues. That's why we're here tonight. Too often in traditional debates, they are not discussed, and so we try to make sure people are educated about where candidates stand on the issues. First, I want to thank our friends here at the Roosevelt House and Hunter College for participating with us on this important program, for having us in this important historic space. I want to thank our co-sponsors who made tonight possible: the Sam Schwartz Transportation Research Program at Roosevelt House, the Waterfront Alliance, Transportation Alternatives, Common Cause New York, Rebuild by Design, and the Riders Alliance. I want to thank especially our candidates, Assemblymember Alex Borres, Assemblymember Michael Lasher, and Jack Schlossberg for agreeing to participate tonight. A big thanks to Dan Rivley of New York One for moderating tonight's forum. Dan is one of the best political reporters and a former transit reporter when we first met in the city, and we're delighted to have him calling the shots tonight. Whether we're talking about air quality around the Lincoln Tunnel and Queensburg Bridge, urban heat islands in Chelsea, waterfront resilience along the Hudson and East Rivers, or reliable public transit and access to green space, environmental issues shape daily life in communities throughout the district. These issues are on the ballot in every election, but we stand in an especially pivotal moment. The federal government is rolling back decades of bipartisan environmental protections. They're doing everything in their power to delay the clean energy transition and double down on dirty and increasingly costly fossil fuels. But every challenge is an opportunity. Remember, Congress is the first branch of government. By asserting its constitutional, I guess reasserting, seems like it's a little bit lost right now, including the power of the purse and agency oversight, Congress can begin to push back on these harmful policies. Whether it's ensuring we have access to clean drinking water and waterways, advancing and expanding the Second Avenue subway and clean buses, advancing environmental justice, or boosting wind and solar so we can get our clean energy transition back on track, the role of Congress over the next 2 years will be critical. Tonight, we look forward to hearing from the candidates about these issues and more. One final thing before we get started: the most important thing we can do for the environment as individuals is to vote. Remember, early voting for the primary starts on June 13th and runs through June 21st, and primary day is on June 23rd. Lastly, before you leave tonight, we ask that you take our pledge to vote so you can show the strength of the environmental voter in 2026. So you can do so by scanning our QR code on the tables upstairs, or you can visit our team on the way out. With that, please enjoy tonight's program. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, New York One political reporter, Dan Rivley.
All right, thank you, everyone. And first, let me thank the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund and the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute at Hunter College for inviting me to be a moderator of this forum. It's an honor, and it'll be my duty to make sure this is interesting and informative. And so these questions were developed by myself, the League, Roosevelt House, and our co-sponsors. And first, just want to go over the ground rules. So we're committed to providing an educational forum where everyone has the opportunity to learn. So please, no disruptive behavior, strictly prohibited, and will result in removal from the venue, and we appreciate your cooperation. So here are the ground rules for the candidate. Candidates will begin with a 2-minute opening statement, and we will go in alphabetical order. Then we'll mix it up throughout the forum. I'll ask some follow-up questions, and we'll keep things interesting and lively. So we ask that candidates keep their answers to 90 seconds, and there is a countdown clock in the back, so I'll be keeping time, and I'll let everyone know when there's about 30 seconds to go. We ask candidates don't speak over each other. It's a forum, not a debate, and if someone is called out by name, we'll allow for a 30-second rebuttal, or if I think it's a really thinly veiled reference, I'll allow a rebuttal for that one. It'll be up to my discretion. And finally, we'll end with 1-minute closing statements. And we also ask the audience refrain from applause throughout the forum, except at the conclusion of the program and when we introduce the candidates right now. So please welcome candidates for New York's 12th Congressional District. We have Assemblyman Alex Borres, Assemblyman Michael Lasher, and writer and social media influencer Jack Schlossberg. Come on up. All right, so we're going to do opening statements, alphabetical order. Assemblyman Borres, please take the microphone and you may begin.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you to the New York League of Conservation Voters, to all the co-sponsors and everyone who is here. Growing up in this district, every summer my parents would take me on the Clearwater, the Hudson River sloop, and we'd learn about the generational fight to clean up that river and have it be a safe place for recreation for New Yorkers. In fact, much of my childhood was enabled by groups and people in this room and the activism you fought for, whether that was protected bike lanes, whether that was the parks, Carl Schurz where I grew up, or Central Park, which were my home baseball fields when I played for Hunter. But now I see the world through the eyes of my newborn son, 7 months old, and actually just sitting there, I got a photo of him crawling for the first time, so that's fun. News to my parents who are here. The timelines that we're talking about with climate change, he'll barely be in elementary school when we are having catastrophic impacts on the environment. And so we need urgent action now. My early activism was around the environment. It was fighting for the Green Jobs, Green New York Act of 2009. And the environmental causes were one of the reasons I ran for assembly in the first place, to fight for the Climate Superfund bill, to fight for the Heat Act. And New York's been leading for a while, but that's not enough. It is time for, as Julie said in her intro, Congress to reassert its authority. We've left it to the executive for far too long, and we have an executive now that's rolling back the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gases, is rolling back the reporting and the standards that we need. We need a Congress that is ready to meet this moment, a Congress that is going to fight for my son, for the kids all throughout this country, and to deliver the future that we all deserve, because I still believe that the future is green. Thank you.
Assemblyman Lasher, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dan, and to the League and to Hunter for hosting us. The fight to tackle climate change and protect our environment, it is the existential fight of our time. It is the question of whether Alex's child, my children, are going to be able to live out healthy, prosperous lives. It's a fight that I have been involved in throughout my entire career. Going back to my work as an aide with Congressman Nadler, taking on the Department of Education to remove harmful PCBs from schools across the city. As an aide to Mayor Bloomberg, I negotiated the transfers of Brooklyn Bridge Park and Governor's Island to the city of New York so we could build extraordinary green spaces. As Chief of Staff in the State Attorney General's office, I helped launch landmark investigations into ExxonMobil, Peabody Coal for their lies about climate change. That was a tough fight. They came at us with everything they had, but we stood up and we fought back. And just last year, as a member of the legislature, one of the most significant pieces of legislation I passed was a bill to ensure that wind and solar projects throughout the state could proceed. Because what ideologically conservative localities were doing was trying to tax these projects to death. And at a time when Donald Trump is shutting them down across the country, New York needs to lead. We passed that bill, and we will. What we need to do in Congress is absolutely reverse the dangerous direction Donald Trump is taking us on. We need to pass a transportation bill that invests in our infrastructure. We need to bring back clean energy tax credits. We need to end fossil fuel subsidies. We need to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords, and we absolutely must invest in a clean energy transition for this country. It's what we need for our economy. It's what we need for our future. I will be a congressman who continues the fight I've been waging for nearly 2 decades, and it would be an honor to represent the 12th District. Thank you.
Mr. Schlossberg.
Hey everybody, happy St. Patrick's Day. It's great to be here. My mom always told me St. Patrick's Day was about a lot more than drinking. It was about an oppressed people who fought for freedom, about overthrowing their colonial overlords, and for fighting for a free government. So I think it's altogether fitting that we are here today in an exercise of democracy, and I could not be happier to be doing it in a cause that I care so much about, the environment. I started an environmental nonprofit when I was in 8th grade, Relight New York, because I saw inconvenient truth and I couldn't believe it when I was only 13 years old. And we didn't do much, but we did replace light bulbs in NYCHA housing with high energy efficiency bulbs. And that was my foray into politics as an 8th grader. I went to law school. I got a JD MBA from Harvard. I studied environmental law. I worked at the Environmental Law Clinic there. I worked for the State Department on Oceans Environmental and Science Bureau, planning something called the Our Oceans Conference, which was one of the largest conservation conferences ever done. And it was in the last year of the Obama administration. I'm running for Congress because I still believe in politics. I still believe in politics. After all we've been through as a country, after all we see every single day, we don't have that many reasons to still believe, but I still believe in politics as a noble calling, a noble profession. And if we're going to solve our climate crisis, we're going to need government help. The private sector cannot do this alone. And what we're facing is no less than an all-out assault on the federal government's ability to regulate greenhouse gases. I think of the 70s, the late 60s and 70s, the environmental movement that succeeded in creating the EPA, passing the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. Those are still the laws that we use to regulate the environment here. We need to strengthen them. And that means passing legislation, something only Congress can do, to give the Congress the ability to regulate greenhouse gases. The Supreme Court has taken a hammer and nail to environmental policy, and thank you, because my time is running out.
Thank you for keeping an eye on the clock. All right. All right, let's start the first topic with transportation, and this question comes from the students of the Sam Schwartz Transportation Research Program at Roosevelt House. Congestion pricing, that depends on federal authorization, and it's faced political pushback. If elected to Congress, how would you help ensure federal policy supports cities like New York that want to reduce traffic and emissions? I'll start with Assemblyman Boris. Yes. How would you help ensure federal policy supports cities like New York? Oh, yes, that this question comes from the students of the Sam Schwartz Transportation Research Program at Roosevelt House, and it's about congestion pricing, and it depends on federal authorization.
Congestion pricing has been a tremendous success. I'm a data guy, and the data bears out that it's been even better than the advocates thought it would be. We've seen that pedestrian traffic in the zone is up, that subway ridership, bus ridership is up, that traffic is down, both trips into the zone and time spent in the zone in traffic, that the average commuter is saving 5 days a year in just hours saved in terms of commuting in and out. And it's actually most popular with drivers that are regularly going into it. We've also seen commercial activity going up, and we need to be talking about all of these wins. This is a policy that is working and needs that defense. Now, I have talked about some tweaks that I would like to see to it. I don't love that we are giving discounts to people coming in from Jersey. I think we could be not giving those discounts and investing even more in the subway. But most importantly is that we are fighting the federal government's pushback on it. And if we try to move anything outside of the original environmental impact study, that would give them an opening to shut it down. And
30
so,
seconds.
sorry?
30 seconds.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. So we can continue to tell the successes of it. We can continue to tweak it to make sure it's working. We'll study, we'll get more data, we'll learn, we'll follow the traffic patterns and continue to improve. Keep it within what we have for the environmental impact study now, while continuing to strengthen funding for it and making sure that we oppose the federal government's both lawsuits against it and the legislation that is coming against it. There are downsides, there are parts that we can be honest about, and also say that this data shows it is an overwhelming success, and we should own that and be fighting for it.
All right, and if you keep an eye on the clock, I won't interrupt your flow for the 30-second. Why don't we just go down the line, Assemblyman Lasher, same question.
Let's be clear. We have a federal transportation policy that long before Donald Trump was biased against transit, and Trump has exploded that problem. Our transportation bill requires 80% of the funds to be spent on cars and roadways, and only 20% on transit. In a city like New York, where transit is our lifeblood, that is a policy that hurts our interests. So the most important thing I think we can do at the federal level is make sure that we are allowing for at least a 50-50 split of those transportation funds to be spent on transit versus highways. The other thing I would say is that every piece of Trump's attacks on our congestion pricing policy, on our busways, is politics. It is pure ideological politics. They make substantive and legal claims that are BS, and it is pretextual for an ideological crusade against cities, against blue states, and against transit. And as a member of Congress, I would use the oversight authority of Congress to get under the hood of what the plans were when Sean Duffy launched his BS lawsuit against our congestion pricing plan. What were the conversations? What were the emails exchanged? What were the lies that they told to the public behind the curtain? That's what Congress needs to be doing to pushing back on this Trump administration's attack on our city and our public transit.
Mr. Schlossberg?
Thank you. Congestion pricing, to me, is an incredible example of how popular environmental policy actually is once it's implemented. We have for a long time now, for the last year, 2 years, because Trump convinced us to run away from the environment, Democrats have gotten scared. I support congestion pricing. I think it's great for the city. I think it's great policy. But I think we need to think bigger here. We need to think about how can we have an environmental policy that touches every industry, that touches transit, yes, but also touches our healthcare industry, that touches infrastructure projects here in the city. Because once you implement environmental projects, environmental policies, they are popular. People often don't support them in the moment because of the industry lobbyists who claim that they're going to cost more money, just like what happened with congestion pricing. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when that debate was going on. It was just a couple of years ago. And I heard that congestion pricing was going to be a massive failure, that it was not going to do anything for the city. Well, now it turns out it's super popular. So I think we've got to go further, but I also want to make sure that we make our opponents clear. First of all, it's the Trump administration, which is attacking science and firing all the scientists that work in the EPA. Second, I think the rideshare companies that are using the streets of New York, they should pay a little bit more too. So I think that we've got to take environmental policy is something that I want to run toward if elected to Congress, and I think that we can figure out ways to work it into our infrastructure, transit, healthcare, and the rest. Thanks.
Assemblyman Boers, I wanted to follow up. You said we should be honest about the downsides. What were some of the downsides you had in mind on congestion pricing?
Just anytime there's any tax, you have a question about affordability. Now, obviously, the investments that we're being able to make in the MTA are making things better, but and we have some discounts for people who are low income in the zone, et cetera. When congestion pricing was originally proposed, it was just 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday. It was about that commuting while allowing sort of recreation on the weekends to have more. In other jurisdictions, there's been a discount or exemption for people that live in the zone. I think there's also improvements we could make on the IDEP program and making sure that people with disabilities are clear. So it's implementation questions with it, but it has been overall a success, and we should be defending.
And for all three, should the congestion pricing zone be expanded to include the Upper West and Upper East sides?
I think if we were designing from scratch, we could look at things, but right now we have a system that is working. I would want to be studying more data before I was adjusting where the lines are.
I think there are a bunch of questions. This is a big policy, and there are all kinds of suggestions about how it should be changed or reconsidered. Some of those are good faith, some of them less good faith. I think that it is reasonable to say every so often we're going to have periodic consideration of the program by the TBTA with a basic principle that any changes need to either be revenue neutral or revenue positive. So before we do new exemptions, before we do any zone changes, the question should be, are we making sure that any changes we're making to the program, we are generating as much, if not more, revenue for the MTA? I think that would be a reasonable, responsible way to think about what is a significant change in our policies, a very positive change, but a significant one.
Mr. Schlossberg?
Only if it was tied to a paralleled increase or some type of taxation on the rideshare companies that use our streets.
All right, let's go on to the next question. New York has a mandate, New York City has a mandate for an all-electric bus fleet, school bus fleet, by 2035. And one report found there are 68 electric school buses on the road in the city since the start of the 2025 school year. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is proposing changes to the Clean School Bus Funding Program to get more money toward alternative fuels instead of focusing so heavily on electric buses. So the question is, what can be done to get New York City to meet that goal? And would you seek funding for school buses to use alternatives to diesel, like liquefied natural gas, under this revamped Clean School Bus Program? Let's start with you, Mr. Schlossberg.
I think there's so much the federal government can do on environmental policy, and that includes transit and transportation. We're not going to get to the place we need to get to in terms of emissions unless we have a federal strategy. That means a massive investment in batteries and in building the cars and buses that you're talking about, because only if that's done nationally. And we have to rebuild our grid, by the way, because if we're all going to plug in our cars at the same time, it's going to crash the grid. So there's so much work to be done. The environmental movement of the past was a lot about stopping development. It was a lot of, and I worked on cases when I was in law school at the Environmental Law Clinic about stopping pipelines. I think that that's important, and conservation is very, very important. But the environmental movement of the future is going to be about building massive infrastructure projects. Because the only way that we're going to get ourselves out of this is by building things that work better, 21st century technology. So yes, I think there's a ton the federal government can do to make sure that we have cleaner buses for school children. That's something that sounds so good, but even Trump would probably find a reason to hate cleaner buses for school children. But it also speaks to something I think is very important, which is environmental issues are economic and healthcare issues. Environmental issues like what you're talking about, if you clean up the emissions, Asthma Alley in the Bronx is a very famous example of this. It also has compounding effects on the community that save money in the long term and make life better.
So would you take the grant for a cleaner or alternative fuel, liquefied natural gas, if they said it's this or nothing?
Yeah, I would absolutely take it.
Assemblyman Lasher?
You know, I have 3 kids. My oldest is a sophomore in high school, and these days he's late on his homework sometimes. And what we do not do in our household is say when he's late on his homework, that means he doesn't ever have to do it. I don't think it is a good policy to say when we miss deadlines, we then just throw them out the window. And that's coming up in a bunch of environmental contexts in New York right now. And so there's no question we are behind on the electrification of the school bus fleet. The state should be doing more to invest in that, to try to create as much production, including here in New York, as we can, to try to fill gaps left by the federal government in a reasonable way. I would be extremely reluctant to invest in a new set of school buses that will have a much longer renewed useful life that depend on LNG rather than electric.
Assemblyman Boris?
I don't have the experience of a kid doing homework yet. I'm excited. But also sometimes we need to hold ourselves to deadlines. And one of the problems that comes up again and again in fighting for environmental policies is that government budgets year on year. And so we always say, oh, this year, this is going to really hurt to do, so let's push it off a year. And we don't think about, over time, the costs of inaction and the fact that cities and states are paying for the diesel fuel and that that's expensive. And that by pushing it off, we are contributing to more pollution, and that's leading to more asthma, and that hurts our budget. And if you take a long-term view, I think we can't afford to wait any longer on these investments. And we need to call a spade and say, we set these targets for a reason. They were negotiated at a time where we thought about what the trade-offs would be. We knew they'd be hard. We knew it would require upfront investment. It is time. Our bill has come due. We need to deeply, deeply invest in it. Now, if the question is there free money? I say let's do everything possible to not need it, but accept it and then turn it back when we don't need it. But that is not an excuse to go away from our deadlines. We should be funding, the state, the city should be investing deeply in that clean, renewable electric bus fleet.
So let's talk about transit projects and infrastructure. It's well documented, New York's transit projects, they cost more and take longer to complete than our peer cities. Even over in California, there's an unfinished and costly high-speed rail project that's become a cautionary tale. Are there any reforms you would support so that projects here in New York get built with a reasonable budget and a timeline? And what infrastructure project or transportation project would you like to see funded federally, and any strategy to get more transit funding to New York? Assemblyman Lasher, why don't we start with you?
I was going to suggest that we could all just say in unison the Second Avenue subway. But I will add to that list the Interborough Express, which was a project that I'm extremely proud to have helped launch as policy director for the state. It will be the most significant expansion of our mass transit network in decades. In terms of the pace and cost of our infrastructure projects and subway projects included among them, certainly I think design build has been an important reform. We've applied it to the MTA. I think it perhaps should have broader applicability. I also think that one of the problems is, and this is where New York really does stand apart from our Western European peer cities, is that our agencies that build infrastructure have really thinned out their in-house capacity. And I give Janno Lieber a great deal of credit for trying to rebuild it, but it has left us extremely reliant on massive consulting contracts and outside expertise that have to get ramped up with every new project. And that is a huge cost. It is a time lag, and I think over the long term, we would save money and time if we had stronger in-house expertise on engineering, design, and construction.
Mr. Schlossberg?
So, Second Avenue subway, of course, I agree with Micah. I think we all agree on that. There's so many infrastructure projects in the city. Gateway, another one. What we need to do is win back the House of Representatives so that we can undo the big, beautiful bill, which took away most of the infrastructure funding that was given to this state and others around the country. President Trump is playing politics with our infrastructure. He's playing politics with our infrastructure by taking that money, holding it hostage until he gets Penn Station named after himself. I think that that is, first of all, outrageous, but second of all, a strategy that's not that hard to beat. All you got to do is rally public opinion and public support to stop him. I think that I can do that as a congressperson. I think that I would do that for environmental issues on day one, because I think that this city needs infrastructure and we need to get serious because we are the most vulnerable, probably of any city on earth, to climate adaptation. We need to fund, the Second Avenue subway is going to get flooded as soon as we finish it unless we come up with the money for adaptation efforts. So there's a lot that we got to do, but I think it all comes down to one thing. At the end of the day, we are living in a moment where political power, too often, I wouldn't design it this way myself if we were starting from scratch, but it relies on public pressure, galvanizing public support. That is something that I would want to do for this city to make sure that our infrastructure projects are funded.
Assemblyman?
Turns out when Democrats debate the environment, we agree on a lot of things. Yes, the Second Avenue subway, both the connection to 125th and it should go down Second Avenue. We should have two different lines on the east side, the same way there are in the west side. Gateway project, obviously, which part of that is going to be Penn Station redevelopment, perhaps as well, to be able to really take the best usage of Gateway when it is completed. Design build is a great way to be more iterative and reduce costs in that way. We also, the MTA spends more on consultants than they do on engineers. That is ridiculous and needs to be reined in. And also, we could be looking at the designs. I think the Second Avenue subway stations are beautiful. And also, so much of the cost of that line was the massive, massive stations. And I would trade a lot more miles and a lot more stations for not having them be quite so grand. We can make these real trade-offs in terms of what's providing for the infrastructure of the city, for moving the people of the city, and keeping the real environmental and transportation goals in mind. The committee that I will request in Congress is the Transportation Committee to fight for these dollars, because this district, more than perhaps anyone else, any other district in the country, is one with really important infrastructure dollars or projects that we need to fight for. I'm proud that this past year in the Assembly, I brought $50 million to my home district, which is peanuts for Congress, but it's a lot for the Assembly. And I will continue to fight for each and every dollar to these infrastructure projects to bring them back to New York 12.
Would any of you three, or all of you three, would you be willing to oppose a union or two unions if you could get more built in an infrastructure project or a transportation project? Would you stand opposed to any kind of policy asked from a union?
You evaluate every question as it comes up. You don't blindly agree with everyone. And sure, if there's wasteful ideas, we'll fight back on it. But let's be clear, Europe has unions. Unions are not the cause of the expense, or at least not a major cause of the expense. It's the fact that we are outsourcing everything, that we are not having efficient designs, that things are held up in litigation. There's a lot of purely American things that are leading to more costs. Europe has plenty of unions, and they're building for half our costs, a fourth our costs. Unions are not the main driver here.
I would agree with Alex. I think there's a tangle of things that are driving up costs. I think that at the end of the day, our organized labor unions want the work. They want to make sure the work proceeds. And so my general sense is that I think we can find a path forward to reforming, bringing down costs, do it in partnership with the unions, and be able to do a lot better. As Alex said, it's not the tradition of trade unionism is not weak in Paris. I don't think that's the primary obstacle.
I think it's a completely, no disrespect, but it's a false choice. I don't think we have to choose. I understand your question, but what I think is, and the history shows, that organized labor and environmental progress go hand in hand. It's often been the unions that have fought for the strongest environmental protections, and it's often been organized labor that has made sure that those commitments are met. So I understand the premise of the question, but I reject the need to make that choice.
All right. Let's move on to an issue we've kind of addressed in passing, but I really want to get your take on it. So House lawmakers, including 11 Democrats, back in December, passed a permitting reform bill called the SPEED Act, and it stands for Standardizing, Permitting, and Expediting Economic Development. It limits the scope of the National Environmental Policy Act, and it also limits the scope of judicial review on projects. So, for you three, would you have voted for it? And is there anything you would like to see changed under NEPA? Mr. Schlossberg, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. So NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, It requires that all federal legislation take into account environmental concerns. NEPA has been an important, very important law in the environmental movement because it has required things like environmental impact studies. NEPA, as well as the entire EPA, has been completely gutted by this president. But it didn't start in the Trump administration. It started 2 years ago when the Supreme Court overturned something called Chevron deference. Chevron deference was the Supreme Court doctrine that allowed the EPA, well, not just the EPA, but basically it deferred to agencies' interpretation of their own statutory mandates. This is a really important issue that we have to address as a Congress, because only Congress has the power to rewrite laws and make sure that they are clear in their mandate to the EPA that it has the authority to regulate greenhouse gases, to regulate emissions from cars, to regulate our waterways, navigable and not, to make sure that we don't have runoff pollution. This is a huge, huge silent revolution that's happened in our government. And we're not going to be able to do anything about environmental issues going forward unless we specifically write them into law. That's what the Supreme Court has said. Unless we give the EPA the specific instruction, you are authorized to do this, regulate CO2. You are authorized to regulate point source pollution from sewers and other agricultural runoffs. So we have to get a lot more precise in our legislation, and NEPA is certainly a part of that.
That's a no on permitting reform? Would you support the permitting reform legislation if it came back in the House and you were there?
I haven't seen this particular permitting reform, but I think in general, if it's weakening environmental standards, if that's what opposition means, then I do not support weakening environmental provisions. Thank you.
So I would have voted no on the SPEED Act because it's permitting reform in exactly the wrong way. We should have permitting reform that makes it possible to site wind and solar projects. We should have rational permitting reform that enables us to do transit-oriented development. We should not have permitting reform that fast-tracks fossil fuel projects. That's what the SPEED Act was. I would have voted against it.
I agree with Micah, and I agree with Jack from his intro, where the environmental movement historically was about stopping bad projects, and now we're transitioning into a mode where we have to enable good projects. But we can still differentiate between those as we are pursuing permitting reform. We don't need to accept making it easier to build, to drill, to build natural gas facilities while we pursue making it easier to do offshore wind and install solar. We can differentiate between those. So yes, there's way too many lawsuits, way too many processes in the way too many environmental reviews needed for things that are clearly benefiting the environment. And we should be pursuing permitting reform that speeds up that process. But no, the SPEED Act as written does not do that, does not do it the right way, and I would oppose that false narrative that the Republicans have put forward.
Did you, just to toss this question out there, did anyone like the process congestion pricing went through with all that environmental review? And it basically creates a lot of points of failure for critics of the project to try to stop it. Is that the kind of environmental review that was good for a project like congestion pricing?
No, I think congestion pricing is one that is clearly good for the environment. And in fact, as people in this room know, congestion pricing did an expedited environmental review. Imagine if it had gone through the full version, how long it would have taken. I mean, that shows how ridiculous this process is and the fact that we do need permitting reform. We do need to review these processes desperately, but we don't need to do that Republican version that's there.
Anyone want to address? Feel free.
I agree. There's no question there is a lot we could do to make the environmental review process go faster and more rationally without imperiling our environment. We don't, I don't think, in 2026, need people standing out in the street with clickers counting the number of cars that go by. We can do rational improvements to the EIS process, particularly focused when projects have a salutary effect on our city and our society. And I think we should aim to reduce the number of blockage points that bad faith actors can use to gum up good projects and good policies like congestion pricing. But we also need to be very clear that there are bad faith actors that want to gut environmental review for the wrong reasons, and the SPEED Act, I think, is a good example of that.
Good, feel free.
I think, it's called red tape for a reason. Everybody hates it. But I'm a little bit worried about a Democratic Party that is very, very quick these days to single out environmental reviews and single out environmental issues as not worth anyone's time. That's not an approach that I would take to Congress. I think that Mr. Lasher is totally correct. We could use more technology-based solutions in our environmental review process, totally fair. But I think it's a little bit of scapegoating what we're seeing going on right now, and I'm someone who wants to stand up for environmental protection.
All right, let's move on. Both President Trump and Governor Kathy Hochul want to revive nuclear energy. Do you support this effort, and what kind of voice would you want to have in the debate about nuclear energy? Assemblyman Boris.
We are facing a climate crisis, and so any carbon-free energy source should be on the table. Closing Indian Point, which when I was riding the Clearwater was something we were protesting the Indian Point. Now I think closing it was probably a mistake. The dirtiness of our electricity here in New York City went up 25% because of it. So nuclear can be part of the solution. Now, frankly, it's not cost competitive with solar and wind at the moment. And maybe future small modular reactions meet that. Maybe there are changes that are there. I'm very open to letting it compete. Could be an important piece of the baseload question, depending on how much progress we make on battery storage as a way of balancing out solar and wind and the reliability of it. But we have come so far. It is an undertold story about how much we have driven down the cost of solar and wind and renewable sources and geothermal networks and all of these things that right now they are cost competitive. They are the cheapest source of energy, and we should be diving into those full force and continuing to push them forward in all cases. Now, there might be a time where nuclear is part of the solution. I'm not going to write off nuclear because of that. Let it compete on cost basis. But let's not tell the lie that, oh, there's no other way of doing it with renewable. We need to be going full force in all of these sorts of alternative energy.
Assemblyman Lasher, go ahead.
I think we see time and again, we get to the 5-yard line of a really significant and important progress marker on an energy transition, and a postponement comes, an excuse comes, a distraction comes. And what I worry about the conversation about nuclear is that it is a distraction from the important and sometimes hard things we need to do to make a robust transition to renewable energy in this state and in this country. And so while I would not rule it out, I do not think that's where our focus should be, and I certainly don't think we should be perpetrating the false narrative that it is going to obviate the need for investment in wind and solar or eliminate some of the certainly near-term hard questions and choices that we need to make as we move forward.
Mr. Schlossberg.
I happened to be the first American inside of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant after it melted down. And I saw firsthand the terrible effects that a nuclear disaster can have on a country and its entire region. So I think when we talk about nuclear energy, we have to make sure that we also keep in mind the extraordinary risks that this technology brings, as well as it implies a pretty dramatic faith in the lasting of a democracy, because nuclear waste will last a very long time, especially the kind of nuclear waste that is produced by these power plants. That being said, I don't think we really have a choice right now. I think the environmental movement almost basically started in this country in opposition to nuclear power. Many of you know that. But I think as the three of us are sort of saying, we can't take things off the table entirely when faced with a catastrophic and existential threat. That being said, I would much rather have us invest all of that money in the technologies that are proven to work, wind and solar, generating that capacity. But also, we got to keep in mind, this is a national security issue. A lot of the uranium deposits and all the fuel are deposited, most of them are not in the United States of America. And so do we really want to create a fuel trade, a global uranium and nuclear power fuel trade around this country? I'm not so sure we do, but I think that the rise of data centers and how we're going to power those does present some kind of solution potentially for a bring your own energy approach where the hazards and risks might be shouldered primarily by a private company.
All right, so I hear the skepticism. It's not off the table, but obviously clear wind, solar should be the priority and not taking it off the table. But if the federal government and the state government get together and overrule you politically, how would you approach the issue? Would there be some kind of a buffer that you would like to see, not in our backyard, not too close to New York City? Where would you feel comfortable getting our nuclear power if that was going to be brought here to New York? Assemblyman Boris, why don't you start?
I feel like I'm often taking the lead in the follow-ups.
We'll switch it up.
No, all good. That should be led by the science. Small modular reactors are different than the Gen 1 reactors that are different than the ones that are currently online. And so, no, I wouldn't come here and say, oh, it has to be a this zone or that. It should be led by the science of each of these different kinds of reactors. Listen, if the federal government wants to give us a whole bunch of money in the way that makes it cost competitive, then great, right? It is a carbon-free source that comes with some downsides, but we are facing truly cataclysmic situation with carbon. That said, it would have to be a lot of money because right now it is much, much more expensive than the renewable sources that we should be spending most of our time on.
Mr. Schlossberg, would you fight a site for nuclear power if it was a little too close to New York City?
I mean, I'm more interested in who is shouldering the burden of paying for the constant upkeep that goes with nuclear power waste protection, basically. In the past, we've seen a lot of these Superfund sites and others. A lot of that nuclear waste and runoff goes on communities of color and people who can least afford to shoulder that burden. Not that any of us can, but often forgotten communities. I think that the idea of having a nuclear power plant anywhere close to New York City is not something. It's not definitely a winning voting issue for anybody in this room. But what I'll say is that we as New Yorkers, I think, take pride in the fact that we are ahead of the curve, that we do things not because they're easy, because they're hard, that we're willing to invest in new technologies and do things that are questioned by other states, but where we see the payoff because we know it's the right thing to do. Whether that's true for nuclear power, I'm not so sure. I'm not a nuclear scientist, but I'll say that I'm really proud that our state has often taken the lead on environmental issues.
Assemblyman Lasher, if New York gets a nuclear site, what would be some of your concerns? How would you handle it?
I mean, the short answer to the way you framed the question before is, yes, if there was a nuclear site that was too close to New York for our safety, of course I would fight it. I'm sure we all would. I think the part of the problem here is that because none of us are nuclear scientists, much as I enjoyed the TV show Chernobyl, we depend on expertise at the federal level to adjudicate the question of what is safe. And that has been eviscerated by Donald Trump. When I was in the Attorney General's office and there were issues related to Indian Point, there were regulatory processes through FERC at the federal level. We commented on them. We pushed FERC to make sure they were looking out for the interests of New Yorkers. There isn't a New Yorker who follows this stuff who should have any confidence in this government to make sure they're looking out for our safety. And so I think the thing that a member of Congress needs to do is, number one, rebuild expertise at FERC and every federal agency that is charged with looking out for our well-being, and make sure that when you've got something as significant, consequential, potentially dangerous as a major new nuclear site, that we are, through our legislative channels and our legal channels, making sure that FERC and federal regulators are holding any developer responsible for the safety of New Yorkers.
All right. Let's move on to environmental justice. I'm going to have this a little bit more open-ended. What does environmental justice mean to you personally, and in particular the district? I looked it up, and there are a few census tracts that are meeting the criteria for New York's disadvantaged communities, and they're largely clumped together in the west side of Midtown by the Lincoln Tunnel. Not many census tracts elsewhere in the district, but what does it mean to you personally and for the district? Schlossberg,
Happy to
let me
go
start with
first.
you. Yes.
Environmental justice cannot be separated from environmental issues generally. The environmental justice movement was started by a man named Dr. Bullard. He teaches down in Houston now. And basically, what he opened people's minds to is the fact that environmental issues really have to do with private industry, private enterprise versus the public interest. That is what almost every environmental lawsuit entails. It's basically a story of big companies, big polluters, corrupt companies not paying for these negative externalities that they're dumping on the rest of us. And the communities that usually shoulder that burden are the ones who have the least loud political voice. I referenced earlier Asthma Alley in the Bronx. That's just one example of environmental injustice. I think that environmental justice, to me, it means a lot of things. It means that, I paddle almost every single day in the Hudson River on my stand-up paddleboard. I think everybody should have that opportunity. That's one form of environmental justice. Another form of environmental justice is that we should all have the right to breathe the same clean air and clean water. And we do not have a federal government right now that is committed to that whatsoever. In the 1970s, this country identified 13 senators, the dirty dozen, and kicked them out of Congress and passed the strongest environmental legislation ever that we are still relying on today. I think an environmental justice movement of today means understanding that these issues touch all of us, rallying ourselves to identify which members of Congress are blocking environmental progress from happening, which ones have super PACs paid for by fossil fuel companies, and getting them out of the way.
Assemblyman Lasher.
You know, I grew up playing in Riverside Park along the Hudson River. And when my kids were young, I found myself spending an enormous amount of time in that park. And I thought I wanted to get involved. I joined the Riverside Park Conservancy Board. I ended up serving as chair of that board. I was on the board for 10 years. And that park and the area covered by it runs from 59th Street to 178th Street. And that goes adjacent to an array of communities with very different socioeconomic circumstances. And what I discovered was that in every corner of the way that that park was funded, serviced, operated, the parts of the park in the southern half received a fundamentally higher level of investment and attention than the parts of the park in the northern half. And I spent my years as chair of the board trying to chip away at that inequity, trying to bring money in that was focused on the northern part of the park, recruit board members who lived in neighborhoods from the northern part of the park, trying to drive staff to the northern part of the park. And this was, I can't blame this on Donald Trump. It was embedded in government funding, in philanthropy, in staffing decisions. This had been going on for decades, and it still goes on. I did not solve this problem. And the lesson that I drew from this is that environmental injustice is all around us. There is no single solution. It requires unbelievable proactive vigilance when you are making policy to try and reverse what is a decades, if not centuries long buildup of injustice in our environmental policies in this country, in this state, and in our very own city.
Assemblyman Boris.
Environmental justice is about the fact that the externalities of modern life, the pollution, are primarily dumped onto poor neighborhoods. It's that the coastal flooding that doesn't get repaired or that draws down property values ends up impacting poorer neighborhoods. It's that those who can least stand up for themselves or those that can least afford a lobbyist to impact the permitting structure as it goes end up taking a disproportionate share of the burden. And unless you have policies written into law, written into the process of how money is distributed, that will continue. That is a basic fact of our democracy, that right now some people are quite disempowered. And so we need to be promoting models like what we did in the Environmental Bond Act, where a certain percentage have to go to environmental justice communities. That when we are thinking about where we are funding actions going forward, it is written into law that a disproportionate amount will go to communities that currently are being hurt by what we are doing. Only by having that protection of law will we counteract the lobbying and the pushing that happens at every single level through the process that continues to leave those who are disadvantaged even more disadvantaged.
Just a follow-up, is there a particular part of the district where there are people disproportionately impacted by pollution and adverse environmental concerns you'd like to address? Mr. Schlossberg, we'll start with you.
Those who are living in public housing often face some of the most severe cases of environmental justice. Just this week, this month was uncovered that some toxic pollutants or traces of them were found in a neighborhood that I live in Chelsea, in the housing development there. I think also, as I mentioned, I am an avid stand-up paddler, and you know what? There are absolutely no opportunities for anyone in Manhattan, pretty much, to get on the water. And I think that that is another thing that we have to recognize, is that access to green spaces, access to public spaces, access to the joys of nature are part of this environmental injustice, which is that so many people who live in cities are often sheltered and sequestered from those. So I think that that's those are two examples, just to tell you a couple.
All right, Assemblyman Lasher.
I would agree with Jack. I think you've seen a lot of environmental hazards over the years in NYCHA be allowed to go on for unconscionable periods of time. The mold crisis in public housing, which led to a court-appointed monitor to remediate, is an unconscionable failure of government, I would say. And I think also, we have significant parks in this district that do span not just within the district, but parts north. And I think, as I mentioned with Riverside, it's true with Central, there is a long history of inequity. I give a lot of credit to both the city and the volunteers who are involved in both of those public spaces in trying to turn that around, but it's a very long process.
Assemblyman Boris?
NYCHA housing, parks, and also around the tunnels, around where we have additional traffic that is spewing out toxic air and leading to higher asthma rates as well.
Because we're doing so good on time, I'm going to allow myself another follow-up. Since you all three mentioned public housing, I wanted your opinion on some of the ways city government has been trying to fix those seemingly entrenchable repair problems. These buildings are incredibly old, and of course, in one development, there is going to be a tear down. It's very controversial. It could mean it's going to mean a new building, but this is a very difficult issue for those tenants living there. What do you take of the plans to fix NYCHA, and including perhaps just building brand new buildings and tearing down some of the old ones that simply just are too old to be repaired? Mr. Schlossberg?
Yeah, thank you. For those of you who don't know, there is a NYCHA public housing development in Chelsea, the neighborhood I live in, right next door to me. The Elliott Chelsea houses. Actually, if you ask some people, it's Elliott Chelsea. Some other people say Chelsea Elliott. So you'll forgive me. But there's a plan to demolish these buildings and convert public housing into a development paid for by private development. This is a difference that goes back to a law, which is Section 8 versus Section 9. Section 8 is not true public housing, whereas Section 9 is the legal mechanism by which true public housing is funded. Why does that matter? Because Section 9 provides true guarantees to the community and to tenants. Section 9 protects tenants and the community and makes sure that public housing stays public housing. These developments that I'm talking about were in their charter said that they must in perpetuity remain public housing. I think that that's exactly what should happen. I don't want the entire city to look like Hudson Yards. I think it's great to have development, and I think that we need to increase the supply of housing in this district. When I go out, I've talked to thousands of people now on the campaign trail. Housing is almost everybody's top issue. If it's not their top issue, it's their second. Because we need to build more housing in New York 12. There's no other way around it than we need to increase supply. I don't think that means we should kick elderly people out of their homes, demolish their homes, kick them out with nowhere to go, and then convert that public housing into basically semi-private housing. So this is a short answer for me, and I would love to talk to anybody who wants to know more about this. It's a very complicated issue. There's a lot of passion on either side. I totally see both sides to the argument. I think it's really complicated, but I was someone who didn't know that much about it until I went to 4 or 5 tenant meetings and spoke to and listened to the elderly tenants who were opposed to this and who had been up against a lot of lies from other people saying that everyone had voted for it and that the whole thing was approved when that really wasn't true. So I educated myself by spending a lot of time with tenants, and to me, that's the kind of congressperson I'd want to be, meeting with constituents, not necessarily those who agree with me, but everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Schlossberg. Assemblyman Boris.
See, when you say we're doing well on time, then we start taking a little extra time on our answers.
Take a little. It's an important topic.
No. NYCHA has a $78 billion deferred maintenance capital budget that comes after years and decades of underinvestment, and we desperately need to make that up. We should first and foremost be fighting for as much federal funding as we can to really be knocking off that deferred maintenance and marking it down. But then there's also creative ways, because I don't believe that this administration is going to give us the $78 billion that we need. I didn't want it to be that funny, but fair enough. we can be doing things like making sure that Section 9 is eligible for many of the tax breaks that only apply to Section 8. We can also be ensuring that NYCHA can issue federally backed bonds at a much lower interest rate so that we reduce the carrying costs over time and can fund many of the projects that repair it. In some cases, yes, we can do private-public partnerships. Now, the project in Chelsea, I think the vote among the tenants was rushed and they were not fully, it did not have the full education process there. But if they were to go through a full one and vote for it, it will be tenant-led and that would be the process to go forward. But we need to be fighting for both direct funding from the federal government and far more creative ways of funding these repairs long-term, because it's not just what's happening in Chelsea. It's what's happening in Isaacs. It's happening all over the district. And this needs to be part of the infrastructure conversation that the next member of Congress is fighting for.
Assemblyman Lasher?
Boy, we could do a whole night on this, Dan. Look, this is an incredibly important and difficult issue. I think that probably the first job of an elected official is to be honest with people, even when it isn't easy. And we are massively short of funds for NYCHA, not for lack of trying and not just because of Donald Trump, but over decades through successive Democratic administrations. And I am not going to tell the residents of Chelsea Elliott or Fulton Houses that the cavalry is going to come from Washington while they are living in housing that is crumbling before them. And what hasn't been mentioned is that Section 8 is a funding stream. Fundamentally, Section 8 and Section 9 are funding streams. Section 8 comes with about $650 more per month per apartment. And NYCHA is using that to fund in different ways, in different developments, improvements to the housing stock. And there are challenges that come with it. There are a different set of rights that tenants enjoy under Section 8 and Section 9. In the NYCHA trust legislation, which we passed in Albany, it made sure that any tenants that were part of the NYCHA trust received all the rights under both Section 9 and Section 8. So those tenants will be more protected than any tenants in the city in terms of their rights. And the reality is that there is no viable near-term alternative plan to provide decent living conditions for the people at Chelsea Elliott. The structural problems in that development are deep. This is not replacing dishwashers. These are plumbing systems, HVAC systems, buildings that are going to have to be ripped up. The idea that a renovation in place is going to be less disruptive than the plan that's on the table is simply not honest. This is, as Churchill said about democracy, the worst plan we've got, except for all the others.
All right, thank you. Let's talk about democracy. Gerrymandering, that's always a good topic, right? Democrats were really leading the charge, the debate about ending gerrymandering, that it was a threat to democracy. Do you think that was a tactical mistake, given that Republican-led states are now doing redistricting, partisan redistricting in the middle of the decade? Assemblyman Lasher, we'll start with you.
What were you saying? What is the tactical mistake?
Was it a tactical mistake for Democrats to push for an end to partisan gerrymandering now that we're seeing Republican-led states do partisan gerrymandering in the middle of the middle of the decade?
Well, I think at a national level, the push for a national ban on partisan gerrymandering was absolutely right. Had it passed, we wouldn't be in this situation, and I will fight like hell to pass it in Congress. But right now, we are in an arms race on redistricting. We do have Donald Trump calling up the governor of Texas and saying, steal me 5 congressional seats, like he called up the governor of Georgia and said, find me 10,000 votes. That's why I introduced the constitutional amendment to allow New York to do a mid-decade redistricting if another state does so first. I certainly believe in the principle that we should have competitive elections for individual congressional districts. But the principle I really believe in is that we should have competition for control of Congress. And if blue states sit on the sidelines while red states gerrymander the hell out of their congressional districts, we will cease to have competition for control of Congress. We will have a Russian parliament. And that is a massive chipping away at our democracy. So I am fighting to allow New York to fight fire with fire, because it is a fundamental question of whether we are going to hold on to our democracy. And in Congress, I will fight for a national ban on partisan gerrymandering to end this destructive arms race.
Assemblyman Boris?
There are so many things that Donald Trump has done that were completely unimaginable before he got in there. No, it is not a mistake for us to have stood on principle and to say that there should be a national ban on partisan gerrymandering. There should be a national ban on mid-decade redistricting, which wasn't even a term that existed until a few years ago, hence me tripping over it. No, we should be standing on principle. We should be united in saying, we stand for an end to partisan gerrymandering. That brings voters over to our side. That brings swing voters over to our side, and that could be a mandate for the next Congress. To get to that next Congress, I agree with my colleague, Assemblyman Lasher, that we need to fight fire with fire right now in order to make that possible, but be very, very clear that when we get to Congress, we will be banning this across any state whatsoever and fighting for a true democracy going forward.
Mr. Schlossberg.
I think this is a really important issue, and I think it's really, really complicated. I don't think New York State should be doing partisan gerrymandering here, and I don't think that we should be tying ourselves to the actions of another state to say that we should then redraw the map and disenfranchise voters here in New York. I don't think that that's a good idea. I think that partisan gerrymandering, who's for it? Nobody. The only solution we really have is to pass national voting rights legislation, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and other provisions, to make sure that the right to vote is protected from disenfranchisement, from everything the Trump administration is doing and that we know that they're going to do in the midterm elections. But I really don't think that New York, the state that is where so many progressive movements began, this is our nation's first capital. The Bill of Rights was signed downtown. I don't think we should be in the business of disenfranchising anybody who lives here.
All right, so you don't want to stump for votes on Staten Island when they redraw the district, connecting the... How about for the two candidates who said, fight fire with fire? Would you be open running in Staten Island or anywhere if it meant getting a Republican out?
I appreciate the thought exercise, Dan.
I'm from Staten Island, so I'm posing.
We have great affection for Staten Island. Look, as a practical matter, the improvements to the map mostly will come from Long Island and the Hudson Valley. But I do think that it would be a reasonable thing. The Supreme Court struck it down, but the idea of making adjustments to NY10 and NY11 that would have potentially yielded an additional seat. We will agree to disagree. I really believe we are in, we talk about the fight for our democracy. This is it. The Senate, because of an anti-majoritarian policy in our Constitution, it's crazy to think Barack Obama had a 60 Democratic vote Senate. We're never going back there. So if we pull it inside straight, maybe we win the Senate. If the Republicans are able to do redistricting anytime and anywhere they want, and Democrats do not respond, we will permanently lose the House. And I just think that's too important.
Assemblyman Boris, I'll give you a little extra time to opine on the.
My in-laws live in Staten Island. It's a great, great place.
All right.
But let's also, to Micah's point about being honest, we wrote the constitutional amendment in New York really, really well. So we can't actually change it until after this midterms, until after this election cycle. And so the first time it would take effect is when Donald Trump is hopefully no longer on the ballot. So yes, let's fight fire with fire, but let's also be very, very clear that the second we have control and the second we can pass it, we will ban this nationwide and restore normal order.
All right, let's go back now to the environment. We got the two big rivers on either side of the district, the Hudson and the East River. Efforts to clean that up have been going on for a long time, and I know a lot of progress has been made on the Hudson River. Do you think it could ever be swimmable? And I know it's paddleable because Mr. Schlossberg says he paddles. I want to hear a little bit more about that if you'll indulge us. But I'm going to open up the question of what kind of environmental policy do you want for the Hudson River and the East River to get a cleaner? Mr. Schlossberg, why don't we start with you?
It's really not that dirty, you guys. It's really not. It smells a little bit, but I saw a dolphin in there just in September, so there's hope. I think that we can do a lot about this. I think that as you said, it is a river. Part of this would have to be working with New Jersey and with counties upstate to make sure that the water quality is good and that pollution doesn't enter. There's not much you can do downstream of pollution that's going upstream, but I think there's a lot we can do. We can make sure that environmental concerns make it into the development of of this city in New York. And I think that, yes, the Hudson is a river, but the East River is not quite a river. You know, it's a tidal estuary. I hate to be that guy, but
No, please.
there's a
That's-
lot that we can do. And I think that New York Harbor, and I think we should have the confidence in ourselves that New York Harbor can be a healthy place both for us, but also for animals that we love. I think that our society shows its strength and we're able to take care of nature and make things livable, not just for ourselves, but for other living beings. I know that the environmental movement isn't the most popular these days, but that's exactly why I think that we need a champion.
Let's go over to the east side, Assemblyman Boris.
Thank you, Jack, for defending the tidal estuary of the East River. You know, often these rivers are the river that flows both ways, right? So there are people that swim around it every year, and you have to time it with the tides. Otherwise, it's a much harder swim. We have made tremendous progress in cleaning up the waterways around Manhattan, and that should continue. I mean, one of the odd ways of measuring that is that some of the old wooden docks on the Hudson River are now falling into it because it's been clean enough for shipworms to return to the river. And that's a good thing, even though I hate seeing the docks fall in. New York used to be the oyster capital of the world, and we used to get oysters the same way we get hot dogs, and they were the size of your fist. Let's return to that beautiful world. Yes, obviously we're downstream of what's happening upstate. It requires state-level regulation along with federal regulation to continue the progress in making sure it is clean, but let's shoot for the world. Let's reimagine the world where those rivers are places of recreation, not just for the paddle boarders, but for all of us.
Assemblyman Lasher.
Absolutely, and this is an issue that's actually been a sort of a pet project of mine. I was incredibly proud to champion in the governor's office the Plus Pool project, which would be the first return to swimming in our rivers. And in fact, if you go back and look, in the early part of the 20th century, the East River, particularly down by the Lower East Side, was dotted with effectively floating netted pools. And it was an access point, particularly for kids in lower income communities, to have access to the water. And we should absolutely, and I wrote about this after I went to the Paris Olympics, where they came close to making the Seine swimmable. But they've done a lot more work than we have. And I think we as a city need some big goals. And I think swimmable rivers is a great big goal. A big challenge, probably the biggest challenge, is what's known as CSO, which is combined sewer overflow. When it rains, the water, it's exactly what it sounds. The sewers overflow and the sewage water goes into the rivers. And we have invested a fraction of 1% of what it would take to reduce CSO to a point where the rivers could become swimmable. And I think we should dramatically increase that investment. And if I were elected to Congress, I would fight for federal funding to help do just that.
All right, well, let's stay on the shoreline while we got a little bit of time and talk about some of the infrastructure and the buildings on the shore. There's a lot of projects going on ever since Superstorm Sandy. A lot of money been going into these projects. Just give me your sense of the progress and what you're going to be looking for as these projects get built, and what maybe some of the projects you want to see done on the shore for the infrastructure, and even some of the buildings that happen to be on the shoreline. Assemblyman Boris, let's start with you.
Well, raising up the Lower East Side, the East Side coastline was completed in 2024 under budget. So to our whole conversation about you can actually get these projects done, we need to extend that and continue to raise up the shoreline throughout the east side and also on the west side to build up resiliency for the storms that we know are coming. And in doing that, you can also be investing in parks and recreation along the shoreline to make it so that more people can experience that and have access to these wonderful aspects. So I would continue to invest in those projects that are raising up the shoreline, that are making our parks along it. And I would also be completing the bike loop around Manhattan that the west side has a great job of, and the east side, we need to pick up our slack. So making sure that more people can recreate near nature, can enjoy that, would be something I'd be very invested in.
Assemblyman, go down the line.
We have significant, talked about CSO, we have significant drainage issues that lead to infrastructure issues. So over on the west side, you've got significant portions of Riverside Park that are built on a box above train lines. That box is falling apart. It is at the end of its useful life. That is probably a multi-billion-dollar repair job necessary for the infrastructure of our city. I think if you look at Jersey City as a really good model, as a place that has invested an enormous amount in flood mitigating parkland infrastructure, permeable pavement, parks that are designed to absorb heavier amounts of rainfall. And I think that's something we need to do up and down both sides of Manhattan.
Mr. Schlossberg.
I live next to Hudson River Park. I think that's a great example of a way to make the water more accessible and an infrastructure project that has gone really well. I also want to make sure that the Gateway project, which is underway, actually gets completed and funded. I see it every day from where I live, and I want to make sure that it actually happens so that that tunnel gets built. There's also plans for ferry terminals down in Chelsea, Hell's Kitchen. I want to make sure that that happens because I think the ferry is an underutilized source of transportation in this city. I think there's a lot we can do, but I just want to remind everybody that we're going to need a ton of money for climate adaptation in the years coming forward. It hasn't really happened yet. We saw it a little bit with Hurricane Sandy. We all remember what that was like. But our city is more vulnerable than any other part of the country to the climate crisis. And so we're going to need somebody in Congress who can be heard loud and clear to make sure that we get the money and the funds that we need to make sure that we have the money for adaptation, because it's going to bankrupt New York State and New York City if we have to pay for it ourselves. We need the federal government to step in and help us. All
right. So we've got about 10 minutes left. We want to make sure there's time for closing statements. So let's do a lightning round. This is always a good one. All right, let's start. So we'll keep these answers nice and tight. This is lightning round. This is yes, no. If you want to give me a little hedge, I'll allow a little bit. So let's go underway, and we'll start with Mr. Schlossberg first, and then just go down the line. Do you compost?
Yes.
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 Easy enough. All right. Who is your environmental hero?
I had a professor in law school. Her name was Jody Freeman. She's an absolute genius. You may not know her, but you should read her work.
Assemblyman Lasher?
Teddy Roosevelt, former governor of New York, who preserved more of our natural lands in America than any other person.
And my predecessor as an assembly member on the East Side. I'm not going to pick one person. I think it's the activists. My brain went to the people that run the Clearwater, the people that are out there protesting, the people that are fighting day in and out, that are holding us accountable. We need less of investing in like one hero figure and more of everyone being out on the streets.
All right. Fluoride in drinking water, yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah, right? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, yeah, that's a gimme. All right. Who has stock and shares in oil and gas companies? Mr. Schlossberg, do you own stocks in oil and gas companies?
I don't own specific stocks in publicly traded companies, no.
All right, I got your
house
disclosure.
I inherited from my great-great-great-grandfather, Joseph P. Kennedy, who invested in a well in Oklahoma a very long time ago. That well still produces oil, and I actually can't sell it.
All right. Hess Corporation, ExxonMobil?
I don't own those anymore.
You don't own those any? Okay.
I own three equities: copper, silver, and gold.
All right. But you got income from them, right?
It depends on the year. Yeah, I think it's very. This brings me to a point that I want to make. I studied environmental law. I went to business school and law school. This is the issue I care most about. I don't think it's a bad thing for somebody to understand how the private markets work in energy. I don't think that makes me someone who's going to be beholden to the fossil fuel industry. I think the most important question that you should want to know is not whether or not I used to own stock because I knew that the war in Ukraine would send oil prices up and I'm very interested in energy. I think it's what money is funding my campaign. My campaign has small dollar donations. I do not take corporate PAC money, I do not take super PAC money, and I do not take money from big, giant billionaires or AI companies. And that is the most important thing that you need to know.
Assemblyman Lasher.
No.
Also no, but if you'll give me 20 seconds on it, right? Anyone who invests in an index fund has some exposure to this. And so I don't think we should beat people up for that. I've taken the extra step of I own very little of index funds. I actually own the individual stocks so that I can divest from places where I don't. And I've divested from the 20 oil and gas companies that are in the Fortune 5 or the S&P 500. So no, I don't own them, and I've taken the extra step to make sure I don't even have exposure.
I appreciate you mentioned the index funds. I was going to mention that, Assemblyman Lasher. Index funds, are you aware of anything in there?
I mean, I'm in target date index funds through my 401k. And so to Alex's point, yes, I
right.
suppose so.
What is your favorite park in the district besides Central Park, Mr. Schlossberg? Sure is. I know, that's why I took away Central Park, because I know.
Riverside Park's pretty good.
Okay,
Riverside Park.
Carl shares.
of course. Keeping it local. All right. Have you ever picked up someone else's litter, Mr. Schlossberg?
Yeah, something I actually like doing.
I have. My late father did this constantly. And so I occasionally do it, and I am reminded of him.
Yes, I have.
All right. Let's see. Favorite way to get around the district, Mr. Schlossberg?
Bicycle.
Walking.
Subway.
All right, wonderful. Real division here. All right. Well, since you're all Manhattanites, let me tack on an extra question. One, can you drive a car? And two, have you ever driven an electric vehicle, Mr. Schlossberg?
Yes and yes.
All right.
I learned to drive when I was 35 years old. At this point, I had 3 kids and a minivan, and my wife said, enough, you got to learn how to drive. But I have not driven an electric vehicle.
You got me beat. I got my license at 26. So that's, but yes, I know how to drive a car. Yes, I've driven an electric vehicle.
All right. Do you support the Northeast Supply Enhancement Pipeline that will bring natural gas into New York City, Mr. Schlossberg?
Yes.
No.
No.
All right. Let's see. Let's do one more. Are you an early voter or an election day voter, Mr.
Election
Schlossberg?
day.
I don't have a consistent record on that issue.
All right.
I'm usually an early voter.
All right, good. All right, I think it's now time for the closing statements. We've got about 5 minutes left in the program. So let's start with Mr. Schlossberg right here. Closing statements.
Well, thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to Mr. Lasher, Mr. Borres. I really appreciate candidates that are so well informed and that we can have such a great discussion. It really is. It's great to be with you two and all of you tonight. I'm running because I believe in politics, like I said in the beginning. I think that this is too important of a moment for the Democratic Party and for our country to swing and miss. And I think that we really don't know what comes on the other side of not winning the midterm elections. I think that I can do a great job of galvanizing the energy, the creativity, and the drive of this district and harness that into political power in Washington. I'm really proud of the campaign that we're running. I'm really proud of the team that we've built. I'm really proud, as I said earlier, about where our money comes from and where it doesn't come from. And I think that that's a really important issue that everybody should be asking themselves when they head to the ballot box.
Mr. Lasher.
This has been a wonderful evening, and it's been very congenial because I think we have 3 candidates on the stage who really care about these issues and an audience that does as well. What I've learned in my experience on these issues is that we say it's a fight against climate change, and that word has meaning because there are powerful interests on the other side of this fight. And every time I have been involved in trying to do something that moves us in the direction of renewable energy, that takes on the power of fossil fuel companies, I have faced a fierce fight. And that was true when we went after ExxonMobil and Peabody Coal in the Attorney General's office. It was true just last year when we passed the wind and solar tax bill, when I spent 2 hours getting screamed at by Republicans on the floor of the Assembly, when we tried to pass and failed to pass the packaging recycling bill sponsored by Deborah Glick. It was the most lobbied against bill in the legislative session. And I think if you talk to Assemblymember Glick, who I'm honored to be supported by, you talk to my colleagues in the Attorney General's office, what they will tell you is not just that I take these fights on, but I was relentless, I was willing to stand up to power, and I did not give up until we won or we were dying trying. And that is exactly what I will do in Congress.
Thank you. And last but not least.
My colleague's right. If we all agree, why have we not passed this? It's because of extremely powerful interests and people in Congress not being willing to stand up for it. I see Pete Granis in the crowd. I'm proud to be endorsed by Pete. I am proud to, he is someone who had to fight really powerful interests in his time in the Assembly. I have as well. Any of you that live in New York 12 have gotten about 12 mailers a week with my face on them. You know that AI billionaires and Trump mega donors are spending $10 million to stop me from getting to Congress because they know that when I'm threatened, I don't back down. And that terrifies them. So if you're looking for who can push through all of these bills, all of these initiatives that we all agree on, the Trump mega donors are telling you which one they fear the most. And heck, maybe if we all do this right, in 2 years, in 4 years, you'll be getting mailers not just from the AI companies, but the fossil fuel ones as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate it for an informative discussion. You guys took it seriously. I really appreciate it. Again, I want to thank the New York League of Conservation Voters, the Roosevelt House, and thanks to all of you for being such an amazing audience. And for those watching at home, there is a reception upstairs, so we hope those who can stick around do so. I sure will be. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.